Ethan Reyes rubbed his tired eyes as he drove his Navy Honda Accord through the deserted streets of downtown Chicago. The digital clock on his dashboard showed 12:05 a.m., and the temperature gauge confirmed a bone-chilling 18 degrees Fahrenheit. Snow began to fall in gentle flurries, layering the sidewalks in white. It had been an exhausting evening for Ethan, who had just endured a 6-hour budget hearing as chairman of the city's Transportation Committee. The heated discussions had centered on funding allocations, including a controversial proposal for the local police department to purchase surveillance drones. Ethan had argued fiercely against it, advocating instead for community-led safety initiatives and officer training programs. The streets were eerily quiet, with the occasional car passing by. Ethan's mind wandered to his small apartment, where he hoped his girlfriend Julia had left him a plate of her famous lasagna in the fridge. As he mentally prepared for the solace of home, the sudden flash of red and blue lights in his rearview mirror startled him out of his thoughts. He glanced at his speedometer. He wasn't speeding. Confused but composed, Ethan turned on his signal and pulled over under the amber glow of a streetlight, as his father, a retired firefighter, had taught him to do during traffic stops. 2 officers approached his car, one on either side. Their flashlights pierced through the windows, making it hard for Ethan to see their faces. The officer on the driver's side rapped sharply on the window, even as Ethan was already rolling it down. "License and registration," the officer barked. The name on his badge read O'Connell. His tone was curt, with a hint of unnecessary authority. Ethan reached calmly for his wallet and asked, "Evening, officer?" "May I know why I'm being stopped?" The second officer, whose badge read Callahan, shifted his stance, resting a hand on his holster. "Your left brake light's out," O'Connell claimed, though Ethan knew that wasn't true. He'd had the car serviced just last week. "Officer, I believe there's been a misunderstanding," Ethan replied evenly. "I had my vehicle checked, and everything was working fine." O'Connell's posture stiffened. "Step out of the car, sir," he ordered coldly. "It's freezing out," Ethan reasoned. "Could we perhaps—" "I said step out of the car," O'Connell snapped, his voice cutting through the snowy stillness. Lights flickered on in nearby apartments, and shadows of curious residents peeked out from behind their curtains. Reluctantly, Ethan unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. The icy wind bit into his skin as he stepped onto the snowy pavement, his leather loafers offering little protection against the elements. He raised his hands slightly, keeping his movements deliberate. As he did, he noticed something alarming. Both officers' body cameras were switched off. What happened next would alter the future of Chicago's police department. But for now, standing in the biting cold with snowflakes gathering on his shoulders, Ethan Reyes was just another civilian facing unchecked authority, or so the officers thought. O'Connell circled Ethan like a predator, his boots crunching in the snow. "Think you're smarter than us, huh? Driving around in this fancy car, arguing about brake lights?" Ethan stood his ground, his breath visible in the frigid air. "No, sir," he answered calmly. "I'm simply pointing out—" "Enough talking," O'Connell interrupted. "Drop and give me 20 push-ups. Right here, right now." Ethan blinked, stunned. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," O'Connell growled, hand moving toward his taser. 20 push-ups, unless you'd prefer we search your car." Officer Callahan chuckled, pulling out his personal phone to record the scene. "Better start counting, big guy," he jeered. Ethan hesitated, but complied. The frozen pavement seeped through his tailored slacks as he knelt, his hands pressing into the icy ground. He began the push-ups, counting out loud. Each descent soaked his knees and palms in dirty slush while the officers mocked him between laughs. What the officers failed to notice was Ethan's wallet slipping from his coat pocket as he continued. The thin leather case fell open, revealing his official ID, Ethan Reyes, Chicago City Council member, chair of the Police Oversight Board. Callahan's smirk faded as his flashlight caught the ID glinting in the snow. O'Connell," he muttered, his voice suddenly uneasy. "You need to see this." O'Connell's swagger evaporated as he picked up the wallet, his eyes scanning the ID. His face went pale. "Ethan Reyes, City Council member," he murmured. The realization hit like a cold slap to the face. Ethan slowly rose to his feet, his soaked suit ruined, but his composure intact. He brushed the snow from his knees with deliberate calm. O'Connell moved closer, extending a hand to help him up. "Sir, we had no idea." Ethan ignored the gesture, his piercing gaze making both officers squirm. "Turn your body cameras on," he said flatly. Neither officer moved. "Now," he repeated, his tone icy. The officers fumbled to comply. Ethan glanced around. The growing crowd of residents watching from their windows was now recording the scene. He pointed at Callahan. "Delete that video from your phone, and you'll be destroying evidence. That's a felony." Callahan froze, his hand hovering over his phone's screen. "Sir, we can explain—" "Save it for the committee hearing," Ethan cut him off, stepping back toward his car. His hands trembled slightly, not from the cold, but from the rage simmering beneath his calm exterior. "I expect both of you to submit detailed reports to my office by 8 a.m. tomorrow," he said, his voice sharp. "And Officer Callahan? Include the unedited video. Good night, gentlemen." Ethan drove away, the warmth of his car's heater doing little to thaw his anger. As he pulled into his driveway, his phone buzzed. It was Julia. He let it ring, unable to muster the energy to explain what had just happened. His dashboard clock now read 1 a.m., and the events of the night replayed in his mind like a bad dream. The next morning, Ethan walked into City Hall at 7:30 a.m., wearing a crisp charcoal suit and his signature blue tie. His assistant, Rachel, was already at her desk, sorting through stacks of paperwork. She handed him a thick folder. "Good morning, Mr. Reyes. Here's everything you requested: the officers' complaint records, body camera reports, and their preliminary incident statements." Ethan flipped through the documents, his expression grim. 17 complaints against them in the last 5 years, Rachel noted, her voice heavy with disapproval. None of them were investigated properly. "Let's make sure this one is," Ethan replied, heading into his office. At 9 a.m., the main council chamber buzzed with tension. The room was packed with city officials, concerned citizens, and reporters. The local news had already run the viral footage of Ethan in the snow, and the public outcry was deafening. In the front row sat Chief Harrison, looking visibly uncomfortable, and O'Connell and Callahan, their earlier bravado now replaced by unease. Ethan took his seat at the head of the table. He opened the meeting with a calm but firm statement. "Last night, I experienced firsthand what many of our citizens have faced for years: abuse of power, intimidation, and humiliation. Today, we address not just the actions of 2 officers, but the systemic issues that allow such behavior to persist." He pressed a button, and the large screen behind him lit up with footage from traffic cameras, showing his car driving perfectly legally. Next came the bystander video, capturing the officers mocking Ethan as he did push-ups. The room fell silent, save for the muffled gasps of those watching. Chief Harrison rose, his face red with embarrassment. "Mr. Reyes, while I agree this incident is troubling, I don't think it reflects our entire—" Ethan cut him off. "Chief, this isn't about one incident. It's about a pattern of unchecked authority and ignored complaints. This stops now." The meeting lasted for hours, during which Ethan outlined his proposed reforms. mandatory body camera use with real penalties for non-compliance, independent oversight of civilian complaints, and enhanced officer training programs focused on de-escalation and community engagement. By the end, the council voted unanimously to pass the reforms. 6 months later, Ethan stood before a graduating class of 60 new officers at the reformed Chicago Police Academy. Among the audience sat former officers O'Connell and Callahan, who had chosen to stay involved by sharing their story as a cautionary tale for new recruits. "Look at the person next to you," Ethan said during his address. "That person is not just your partner, but your conscience. True power lies not in force, but in trust. Uphold that trust, and you'll serve this city with honor." The ceremony concluded with a new oath, emphasizing dignity, respect, and community service. Ethan left the academy that day feeling hopeful. As he drove past the spot where he'd once knelt in the snow, he smiled. A new community center stood there now, bustling with activity, a symbol of what had been gained from one cold, humiliating night. Sometimes, Ethan thought, change begins with the simplest, most humbling of actions. As Ethan walked out of the community center later that evening, the warm summer breeze carried a sense of hope. The spot where he had once been humiliated in the freezing snow had transformed into a place of trust and collaboration. It was a reminder that even the coldest nights could spark the brightest changes. What do you think of Ethan's journey? Do you believe such moments of adversity can truly lead to lasting change? Have you ever witnessed or experienced an abuse of power like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this powerful story.